You're tuned into 9 to 5 Work Rebels with your host, Ebony Gale.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gems in Comms series special. Now, this is brought to you by 9 to 5 Work Rebels and in association with Hanson Search, the award-winning international executive search consultancy. So I'm Ebony Gale. I am your host for today, and I am so excited to have Sarah Samee here with me today. Now, she is a corporate communications expert with a wealth of experience. She's been in the industry for over 20 years. Sarah, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me, Ebony.
You are most welcome, and we're excited to have you. So, as you know, this whole idea of the comms, Gems in Comms podcast is really about kind of giving you guys your flowers, and it is really focusing on people of colour within the industry. We all know that the industry is 90% white, and there is, of course, a small but growing segment of people of colour within the industry. But at the same time, there are those voices like mine and yours that have been in the industry for over 20 years. And it's time that we got to give you guys your flowers. So this is what it's about. It's essentially a way of kind of introducing you, but also sharing your lived experiences. As we know, there's not a lot of surveys or studies out there about our own lived experiences of people of colour within the communications industry as such. There's some research that's been done by, the Black Comms Network, but there isn't a lot that go into the whole nuances. So I'm hoping that this podcast gives us a chance to kind of give you an eye-opener and a bit of an insight into people's lives and careers within the industry. So to start off with, of course, we want to know about you. So, of course, Sarah, tell us about yourself, what you do. Have you always wanted to work in comms? And, what attracted you to the industry overall?
I've been in the industry, you mentioned, over 20 years. So essentially my entire adult life. I did the PR degree at Bournemouth. And I think in terms of whether I wanted to be in comms, I had various aspirations when I was younger. I wanted to be a cabin crew, a social worker. Often all my suggestions, my mum would put me off. The cabin crew one, she said, you're going to have to clear up people sick. So that got scrapped off the list. But for me, I never considered going to university until sort of GCSE age. It wasn't really an expectation for me. My parents, my sister didn't go to uni. So it was at that point. And so really luckily, my cousin was a university careers advisor. So she was the one that spoke to me, because obviously back in the 90s, you didn't get particularly good careers advice from school, but the PR degree really came from conversations with her. I was always really good at English. I always found it really easy to make friends and loved talking to people. So it kind of seemed like the obvious choice. I'd never really heard of it before, really, until I'd spoken to her. So that kind of started off my career, and a really, huge, significant moment in my life was doing that degree, because there was a year industry placement, which I worked for an oil and gas company in Barclays. And for someone like me who grew up in a predominantly white working class council estate,
right,
I didn't have any familial contacts. So that really made a big difference. And I think that's really helped me in my career in terms of all the jobs that sort of followed through that. Post-uni, worked at an agency because I wanted the grounding. But since then, I've essentially done 10 years public, 10 years private. I spent 9 years at the Met Police, and have lots of stories in relation to that.
I'm sure.
Also at the Home Office. Yes. And then I've had a couple of heads of comms roles in sort of professional services membership associations.
Okay, brilliant. And so you said it wasn't necessarily the way you wanted to go, but it's the way you kind of ended up going, right? Because of a bit of advice. But at least you got that advice. That's quite key, because not everyone gets that advice, right? Because I certainly didn't get that advice at a college, or at school rather, in terms of like where to go. And it depends on obviously where you came from, background. Some, jobs were not seen to be, attainable, depending on the colour of your skin and where you came from. So I think that's interesting that you had the advice to look into PR and you didn't know about that. So I think that's really key as well. So before we get into a bit more of your lived experiences, I wanted to touch on something that I've asked all my guests so far, which is, we all know we're people of colour, and we know that this is our story and we're telling it from our own voices. But one of the things I always like to ask is, when did you become aware of your ethnicity? So for me, obviously, you're growing up in a Black family. For myself, And obviously at primary school, you're aware. But to me, as children, we just look at people as people. We're like, hey, this is John, this is whoever. You will notice differences, we're not, we can see. But for me, it didn't become like properly issue for me where I thought, oh my gosh, I'm really aware of my ethnicity until I was going to secondary school. And there was these people known as the Chelsea Smilers that were known to attack people of colour and carve in their face basically a smile, but with a razor. And so that was quite petrifying. And knowing that they were just targeting people of colour is when it became more like, okay, this is what's going on. That was my sort of introduction to it. Not the best, but it was really quite eye-opening. So for you, what was it like for you?
I think, so in terms of, my ethnicity, I think I was about 4 or 5. And I really remember it. It was in my parents' house between the living room and the dining room. And I stood for ages. And I basically was doing this with my hands for ages. Yeah. And my mum was like, what are you doing? and I think that's when I realised that I wasn't, I was different. And I think, as you said, obviously my parents live in Mauritius, grew up in a brown family. I have grown up in a blended family. I have lots of mixed race and relatives and white step cousins. So I was used to seeing different people. But I think it was going to school, because certainly my primary school, my middle school, I was the only brown girl.
Right.
So I think I recognised I was different from a very, very early age. And I think that had such a big impact on my personality. I think as children, we develop our personality when we're quite young. And I think my people-pleasing behaviour probably started at quite a young age. You don't want to get picked on, so you're funny. You kind of, you sort of take the mickey out of yourself before someone else can. Someone else
does it, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's from quite an early age.
That's really interesting as well, and eye-opening, and it makes sense, because if you were the only person of colour within your school, then you're going to stand out and you're going to really notice it. Whereas I was in a primary school that was quite mixed, so I didn't feel the whole isolation of being the only one. So that is a lot of pressure as a young child going through that as well. And obviously you reflect on it now, but you think, that is a lot of pressure. So that's interesting. That's really interesting. So
I think that's the great thing about being in your 40s, because you do start to reflect back.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get very reflective as you get older throughout your career. I feel like we've spoken about, obviously, ethnicity, but have you ever felt like race or your ethnicity has held you back in your career?
I would be crazy for me to say no. I think I definitely feel that there are more questions. I think when you walk into a room as a woman and as a woman of colour, people are already kind of trying to take it all in. I think that those of us who are from the global majority, but the minority in the UK.
Exactly, global majority, very key there, very key.
We've all been told by our parents that you have to work twice as hard.
Yes.
And, it's true. They had to work 3 times as hard when they arrived in this country. And so, I definitely feel, and it's the microaggressions, it's the comments that I've had where, I've got a job and I know that I've worked really hard to get that role, and I'm a geek. I really over prepare for things, and not for this, by the way.
No problem.
And I've had people say to me that you've only got that job because you're brown. And
really,
just like, wow, cheers, thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks very much. And was that someone on your level or someone within the company that you worked at that kind of gave you that?
I've had stuff like that from people that I would call friends.
Right.
And I think it's. There's ignorance and there's willful ignorance, and I think there's a lot of ignorance sometimes. So, of course, I think my colour has impacted me, and I think that, being a woman has probably had an impact as well. We have to work harder to be heard. It's very easy to.
I think that to a degree, because I feel like our industry. Sorry to cut you for that one, because I agree with you. I feel like being a woman is difficult, but I feel like our industry is overrun with women. And there are quite a lot of women who are in senior positions. It's just that there are not a lot of women of colour in the senior positions. That's what I find. Obviously we've got the double, because I feel like women in the industry can use that and say, well, actually, it's women, blah, blah, blah. So they get through, like, your white women will get through. But I feel like, and it has always been that way. But for women of colour, we've always got the ceilings. And like you said, you've got people telling to you who are supposed to be friends, saying to you, well, oh, you've got that job because of your colour. How about the fact that, you know, I've went to university, I've actually got the skills for this, I've worked twice as hard to get where I need to be, but no, it's just because it's my colour. So that sort of stuff is really frustrating. So no, I can understand that. And I was going to ask you, have you experienced or witnessed racism within the workplace? And how was it handled?
Yes, I have experienced it, and I've probably seen it. But again, I think it comes down to that underlying racism. So obviously, I was at the Met for 9 years, and I joined in 2006. So that was a good sort of few years after the McPherson report, obviously stated that it was institutionally racist. So I saw a lot of really good work at the Met in terms of working with communities, working within the people that work for the Met, making sure they actually had a proper D&I strategy. But often I think sometimes the worst racism is when it's really subtle. Growing up in a white working council estate, I grew up where there were swastikas written on the wall. I've got loads of examples of being racially abused, but also seeing it. But sometimes in a way that direct racism is a lot easier to handle because you can respond to it. I think it's when it's subtle and there's lots of excuses made as to why you haven't been promoted. And it might be things like, you're not director level or you don't have the behaviours. Well, tell me what those behaviours are.
Exactly.
And I think that for me is always the issue. I can handle racist people that are direct to my face because I can respond. It's when
because of your background.
Yeah.
Knowing how to deal with that. Yeah. Subtle is hard, but I feel like this whole country is built on subtle racism. And whereas America has always been overt. So there are always microaggressions, and sometimes it might miss you at the time, and then you look back and think, actually, that was something that, it was more of an issue than you realize at the time. And I feel like that can happen to a lot of us. And sometimes it's also about having the voice. Are you going to be comfortable to speak up depending on the situation that you're in and whether you're sort of empowered to do so? So it's difficult. So you're saying you've seen certain bits, but do you feel like it's handled effectively in the workplace or wasn't? Particularly at the Met would be interesting as well, because your experience in the Met must be really fascinating because of the institutional racism that they face. And even to this day, they're still facing massive issues around race, which hasn't been that great for them.
No, I mean, it's been really bad recently, but I will often say that I think the police is often a reflection of the society. So you think in France, they have for decades they had a more of a hostile environment towards people of colour, whereas again in the UK it's more subtle. So I
depends on who you meet. It depends on who you meet, because I know people have been beaten up by the police.
Of course, absolutely. And I think that the reason why I joined the police genuinely is because I'd spent many years obviously doing PR for very much for a commercial outcome. It was back in the time when CSR wasn't relevant. Now I think the most amazing thing for PRs and us as communicators is that ESG and purpose is now seen as so important, and we have certainly corporate communicators have such a key role to play in that, to make sure that organisations are genuinely being authentic in terms of the work they're doing. So the reason why I joined the Met in the first place is because I felt, as a person of colour, having had my own experiences with the police as well, which hadn't been particularly positive, but then having met some police officers who were genuinely good people and who go in with the right reasons in terms of protecting people and property, there are pockets of bad behaviour, 100%. And I'm a big firm believer that you have to kind of get into these places to be able to change them from within. And I guess I went in with that naive, which I often do. I go in with the idea that I'm going to change.
We want to go in and change things.
Change everything. People are going to be better. They're going to show more empathy. But the police have got. There are processes in terms of bad behaviour. They've got the Director of Professional Standards. That's where you go. And police officers will rat on other police officers if they've seen bad behaviour, and that's rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I would say that the private sector has just got as many issues as the police in terms of institutional racism. So it's easier to point your finger at the police.
So did you point your finger at anyone in the private sector? Was there any times that you saw it and you thought, hey, or maybe you didn't feel comfortable to speak up, but you might have witnessed it?
Yes, I've absolutely spoken out about people being bullied by other people. I've spoken up for myself. And I would say as a character, my values are really important, integrity, bravery, honesty. Hasn't always worked out for me.
But I try.
You can only try. And I think it's a really small example, but it kind of gives you an idea of what I was like as a younger person. And I haven't lost it, although sometimes it gets drained out of you. But when I was 20 and I was working at Barclays, and I was working with a lady called Maria Darby Walker, who I still know, I'm still in contact with, and she was my boss. And when I first joined, I was doing lots of kind of menial tasks, photocopying, faxing, because it was back in the day with the fax. And I remember going up to her saying, so look, this is really kind of pointless in terms of my time. I may as well go back to Topshop, because the money that I'm paying to commute into London, and I'm actually not getting any PR experience.
Real kind of experience.
Yeah. And then she completely took that on the chin and gave me some incredible projects. I was given, they were closing banks in Sierra Leone, which was a massive piece of comms work. And then also I was heavily involved in the appointment of the new CEO. So I think people should always, even though sometimes it feels like there's a level of don't speak out, just do what you're told. It does pay dividends to speak out. And even if you don't get listened to and you have to leave an organisation, you go out with your head held high. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And you kind of just moved on to my next question, because I was going to say, has there been ever a time when you wish you spoke up or about something? So clearly you have been using your voice. So I think that's really important. And I think it's so important that we are self-advocating for ourselves, like you say. And but I also think it's important that employers do recognise that we're coming from different backgrounds culturally. So some cultures, it's not encouraged for them to speak up. So sometimes you have to work to get that going as well. So another thing I want to pick up on, which I think is an issue, not an issue, but something that I feel like people of colour can relate to, which is what I call code switching, right? Yeah. So it will be interesting to get your take, because obviously you grew up in a state which is mostly white working class, and then obviously you then get plunked into the workplace, and then, it's completely different in terms of how we may interact with our friends and obviously how you interact at work. Yeah. So the question really is about code switching. Do you feel like we can actually lead with our authentic voices in the workplace? Because I find that I often code switch. And then, because I feel like almost, as you said, like we have to work twice as hard. So I feel like, when you're being your real self, you're just being judged, essentially. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to push your voice forward. I feel like that's why I kind of went independent. So I could have my own voice. But again, for you, what's your take on that?
I think everyone code switches in some way. So I'm fully aware that, and this is going to sound really odd, but I feel like my privilege has been the fact that my accent is Surrey.
Okay.
So I've got loads of examples where, back in the day of like follow up, and you're like, you're ringing up journalists and this and the other, and the journalists would meet me and they'd be shocked that, I'm a brown woman.
Wow.
Wow. You sounded so white on the phone.
Yeah.
So I think I think lots of people's code switch, and actually your natural voice comes out when you're with your friends.
Yeah.
So I know. So this is actually quite funny. I was in a documentary series when I was about 22, and actually that's a lie. I was about 21. And in that, I know my accent is different. I know it's different. And because I've spent 20 years away from my council estate upbringing and I've been in London, my accent has changed. And It's probably because I've been in an industry that's 91% white, upper middle class and Southern. Yeah. So I feel like it's changed because of the people that are around me. When I'm back home with my friends and my friends that I grew up with, then my accent probably does change.
Yeah.
So it isn't right, and you should be able to be yourself. And it's because the thing is, I think there's a lot of people in the industry that actually probably have come from council estates, but pretend they haven't.
Yes. Yeah,
and so
I can see that too.
There's definitely, I've certainly been at networking dues and managed to get that information out of some people.
Yeah. Still pull it out of them.
Yeah, of course, right?
Literally, yeah.
I'm going to slightly overshare, and then I'm going to make you slightly overshare. So I think it's crazy. I think accent bias is a real issue. I've got lots of half of my family are from Leeds.
Okay.
Half are from the south. I've got lots of friends who are from the north. And they've definitely been, they've come, when they've moved to London and worked in PR and marketing, they've definitely felt discriminated against because they don't have my plummy Surrey tones.
Yeah.
So I think it's crazy. It makes no sense.
It's just the way people judge, isn't it? They judge people based on their accents all the time. So and then, like you said, you'll sound, as they say, professional. Like I remember working for General Medical Council, so obviously I was dealing with lots of doctors, and I remember having one conversation with a doctor for a while. I was helping him with something, and then he asked for my name. I gave him my name, Ebony. Oh, are you black? I was like, yes. Oh my goodness, I'm so shocked. I could have thought you sound so professional. So black people don't sound professional as far as he was concerned. He was shocked and blown out the water that, he spoke to me. So it was just these sort of things that, I feel like are, again, from people and their own stereotypes and their own issues. And that's what we are kind of facing when we go to work anyway. When we show up as ourselves. But unfortunately, we're meeting people who have their own lens of how they're already perceiving you to be. Even as assumptions are made as soon as we meet people, aren't they? So if they hear you say something, you look a certain way, they're like, okay, you're a B person. So I found it really fascinating. And like you said, it's something that probably a lot of us do. Those who are white as well, but again, when you're white, you can get away with it essentially.
You can get away with it. You can get it's much harder because you can absolutely put on a posh voice and pretend and lie. It's much harder to do that. And I think it's I think it's genuinely a real problem that isn't spoken about.
No, I agree with you. And it is definitely an issue. And I think it even will come down more probably in agencies when they're doing things like pitching and who they're choosing to go out to do those sort of things and who they're going to choose to go and do the client-facing meetings and all that kind of stuff as well. And I've seen, stats where you've got people who are, maybe you've got a person of colour in the room and they're the most senior person in the room, but the client is looking towards the white colleague, assuming that they are the senior person in the room. So you've got lots of layers of it, I believe. So I suppose the question I wanted to ask you also is about when did you become aware of the colour bias within our industry, within PR and communications? Is it something you've always been aware of since you joined the industry?
I think I've always been aware of it. As I said, I grew up. So the weird thing for me, I know we've spoken about this before, was I've had elements where I've had a culture shock. So I grew up in a white working class council estate, went to a white comprehensive school. I think it was a massive school, and I think there were no black people in our year at school. Wow. I was one of 4 other girls from Indian heritage, 2 of whom I think were Sikh, and 1 girl was half Mauritian. So there wasn't very many at all. And then I went to Bournemouth, and I think there was I was probably 1-2 of us on the course.
Wow.
And then, I worked in PR. And the funny thing is, it's like, I met Elizabeth Balanuka in 2016.
Right.
And at that point, I think I knew like 3 people of colour, and she was one of them.
Wow.
So I think I've always been aware of the fact that I've been often the only one.
Yeah.
I think because of my upbringing, it's something I've sort of just accepted. It's because something I'm sort of used to.
Yeah.
And my biggest culture shock genuinely is when I went to work for the Met, because I was based at Wembley Police Station.
Okay.
So Brent is obviously a very diverse borough, and actually that was a brilliant experience for me, because it was the first time I was actually exposed to high volumes of other people of colour.
Interesting.
And I've got lots of
I think that's interesting actually, because I feel like for mine it's similar, but it was once I got into the industry, because I feel like obviously going through to college, very mixed. I mean, I went Brit Performing Arts, so it was very mixed, lots of like, drama and all kinds of stuff going on. Then I went off to go uni, and university was very mixed as well, which is good because it's in London. It's going to be, I decided I want to stay in London anyway, so I went uni in London. Obviously it's going to be very mixed, or in the hub. Going into the workplace was interesting though, because that's where I saw how white it came. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And then you'll see where people of colour were within organisations. So like I'm in my first role, I think there was maybe 1 other person of colour, but in a different part of the team. I think she worked on the website of it. And then I remember moving on, and most of my roles, like you, I was the person of colour within the PR team, within the management team. So it did become like, okay, this is a bit interesting. I think the only time I saw someone else of colour was when we'd have our cross-departmental meetings, and that would be with when I was working in regulation. So we'd have cross-regulation meetings. And there's another black lady that worked for the NMC when I was over at the GMC or wherever I was at the time. So it's like, okay, yeah, there's one over there, yay, you know. But literally, you are used to being the one in the room. But I feel like I even had my eyes even more opened when I joined Women in PR, and just saw how very white it was as well when we had our industry events. And it, obviously, me and you were the two women of colour, the first women of colour to join the Women in PR committee. And I think that should have been made a bigger deal of, to be fair. Because we were, when you think about it, you've got articles written about the firsts. We were the firsts, okay? And I think that is interesting because I also began to see how white the industry was there, as well as seeing the reports and doing stuff in the industry, but seeing it even in looking at women in PR, you're thinking, okay, it's going to be women in PR, so it's interesting. See what the mix-up is. And yeah, it was still quite like, okay, this is quite overrun with white women. And we've got a few dots of, you know, black and brown people here and there. So it's interesting. So
what I would say, I definitely think the public sector is more representative than the private sector. I mean, I certainly, when I say, obviously, when I joined the police, that's when I got to meet a lot more. And a lot of actually, when I was at the Met, a lot of us were kind of on boroughs rather than Scotland Yard, although I did spend a couple of years at Scotland Yard at the end. But yeah, I think the public sector has got more. But then I think a lot of the public sector is, you're coming from all sorts of different backgrounds as well. Right? I do think private sector PR, you are coming from sort of upper middle class backgrounds.
I think so. I think they recruit in a certain way. Yeah. I believe in public sector, a lot of people kind of go to public sector jobs. You know, your local authorities, your things like that. But when it comes to private sector, I feel like, they're very selective about whether they're going for, you know, their red brick university type people to come in there. Yeah. But also, I feel like in a lot of private sector, particularly the industry, like the agencies, there's a lot of nepotism going on. They're bringing in their families, their nieces, their whatever else, and they're pushing them up in the ranks as well. So I think that happens quite a lot. But in terms of our industry, public sector, it's probably a bit more heavier on that side. But again, still not enough. And I also feel like within public sector, there's a lot of people of colour generally, but not necessarily up in the ranks. They are scattered, you know.
And I think I noticed that. I think the first thing, I mean, it's always been like, my mum was a waitress. She's worked in every environment you can imagine. She looked after the royal family, worked at Downing Street, all sorts. Yeah. You know, of course, when I walked into that oil and gas company when I was 20, I did, of course, notice that I was the only person of colour in a industry placement of 18 students, and the only other people of colour were the people, but in the canteen, in facilities, and it's something, there's always that kind of, stereotypes are there for a reason, aren't they? There tends to be a grain of truth. So, we know that there is a thing there.
Absolutely. So I suppose I wanted to move into allyship now. What are your thoughts on allyship? What does it mean to you? And do you have any good examples of what you feel like good allyship is?
I've always had a problem with the word allyship, but I think it's the word allies because it conjures up war imagery for me. Okay. But I understand why we use it. I have seen some good examples. I've got a good network, I think, in PR. People like you, lots of people that I've met that a trusted council where we support each other. I have had a couple of, not many, I would add, but in my 20-year career, I have had a couple of good bosses that have been supportive. Right. I had one who did fight for me in terms of a pay increase. So it does happen. So I was going to use this example, but I think this is what we need to see more of, because often, and we spent a number of years in Women in PR together, and it was challenging at times to have our voices heard. And the view is often, the people of colour have to be the ones, we're the ones fighting for representation. Yeah. Whereas my view is if we don't have a voice, it's your responsibility to have a voice and to advocate for us. So absolutely. So this is nothing to do with PR, but when Rick Mail, he for the comic strip series, he fought for, I mean, he was the most famous person. He fought for Dawn French, Shannon Saunders, and all these other male co-stars to be paid the same as him. Right. So he took that hit. He went into bat for them. That's what I think we need to be seeing. If you're, if you're at board level, it's your role to fight for the people that, don't have a voice and are underrepresented. That whole thing around, you climb the ladder, don't shut the door, you keep it open.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, so I have absolutely had people that have been supportive, but I've had lots of people that
have not been supportive. Yeah, I get it. I feel that as well, because we had the similar conversation. Obviously, I'm doing the interviews, but someone I spoke to last week was saying a similar type of thing, which was, again, one of the sayings that you might have heard of, which is not all skin folk are kinfolk. Meaning that it's because, there might be a black or brown person doesn't mean that they have your back. And there's been instances of that, but there's also instances of those where you have got those who have looked out for you and, will lobby on your behalf. But one of the things that I think it was Katrina Marshall said when I spoke to her in her interview, which I quite like, which is what she said is what she looks at it as what they say about you when you're not in the room. And I thought, well, that's a good point. Very good point. Because what they say behind your back is very important. And that shows you whether they are really, truly for you, or are they fighting your corner when you're not there? If someone says something about you, are they, set them straight and saying, well, no, actually, she's really good at what she does. And this is what she's about. So I think that's
really interesting, though, isn't it? Because you think that's what PR is, right? If PR is all about reputation management, it's not when a company is getting, it's about what people say about you,
exactly.
When you're not in the room, and it's exactly the same thing. And I think you're right. I think that whole, you've got the whole colorism, and there's so many nuanced issues, that like for me, it comes back down to values again, and certainly as I've got older and I look at the work I want to get involved in, the volunteering, I want to be around people that match my energy and also match my values. And so that, that is really, really important. And that's why I think, having a good network of men and women, people that you trust and who will say nice things about you and who will recommend, and you do the same for them. That's kind of where that's where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. I completely agree with that one. So being that you've been in the industry for 20 years, just for 20 years. So, what motivates you, what inspires you to keep going within the industry?
I think, I've talked about this before. I've had moments where I've sort of fallen out of love with PR sometimes, and often that's normally when I'm at the point where I'm not in the right job or I'm not doing the right things. For me it does come down to purpose and passion. I have a lot of energy. I'm very enthusiastic, I'm curious, I'm nosy. I've worked in environments that are fairly dry in some respects, and I can always find the interesting bit. I can always find the good story. I can always find the people. So if I'm feeling flat or burnt out, it's because I'm not doing something that I'm interested in. So, and I think the beauty, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to lie to women of colour and say it's an easy industry to be in, because it's not. It's a hard industry to be in. You have to work really hard, but you have to work hard in any job, right?
Any job you go to, but I think any industry.
So I think there is that whole adage around, if you can find a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think the PR industry can be that way if you are able to find the right role with the right people, with the right industry, the right subject matter. So for me, it's always just trying to find stuff that I'm interested in. And I am, naturally, because and every role I've ever had has been around helping organisations identify their authentic social purpose. I was working on CSR campaigns in the 90s. That still drives me. So I feel quite lucky that, whether they mean it or not, organisations are having to commit to these plans. That's great for someone like me, because I genuinely want to work on areas where we're trying to make a difference. We're trying to make
a genuine difference, right? I get it. No, I'm kind of, we've had these conversations as well offline, where we talk about working with companies that have really purpose and substance and trying to do certain things in it. And I get it. I completely get you, and I agree. It is about finding the right environment for you sometimes, and sometimes you could be a bright spark in the wrong environment, and then you will not necessarily have the love for it because you're in the wrong space. So completely makes sense. So what did you find most challenging on your journey so far within the, working within the industry?
Gosh. What do I find? God, there's been so many times.
That's interesting. Just choose one.
I think probably when I decided, right, you know what, I've been middle management for a long time. You know, you get to that point where you think, I know more than the people above me and around me. I'm bored of saying the same thing and repeating myself. So probably having to fight for promotion. You know, I had a really difficult experience in a role where the director left. They wouldn't promote me to director level, but expected me to do everything. And then I had to fight for 8 months to get a pay rise and to get an official title. And you think, you know what, this didn't happen. And then suddenly you see other people just walk into director positions who have, you know, less experience than you. And you're like, is this a joke?
Yeah, no, I get that.
So I would say that was the most challenging experience. And that, you know, you just have to manage your own mental health, I guess, in relation to those situations. And that's why, you know, having a trusted squad of people around you and just to believe in yourself, you know. And I've got, so my cousin, who's the careers advisor, she's also a trained counsellor, right? So there are people in your network
that you can
use them,
absolutely,
right? You know, use them and, you know, get the help that you need. But I think definitely, and you know, that. But now, once I got over that and getting over the imposter syndrome thing, because that's the key thing. I know not everybody has it, but lots of people do.
I feel like a lot of people suffer from that.
Yeah, and a lot of people that have imposter syndrome are actually successful people, right?
Yeah,
like they're people that are at the top of their game. And you know, I always say, read your CV and just like think about how far you've come to get to this point.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the thing for me. You know, my mum left school at 11. You know, she passed 11 plus, but her parents couldn't send her to school. And I think that for me is my legacy, is actually all the women before me, my mum, my mother's mum, or, you know, I'm the product of all of them, all of that hard work, that blood, sweat and tears. So I think, it's the point, I think for me, it's the point where you challenge yourself and go, actually, you know what, I can go further. I'm not going to be what other people say about me. I'm not going to, you know, listen to the haters if they're there. I mean, they could be that horrible.
It could be your own mind, absolutely. It could be your own mind.
Just your own mind.
You've got to like say, shut up over there. You know, I get it. I get it. It makes complete sense.
And that's my honest thing. But that's where that limited belief thing comes from. Absolutely, I'm not going to lie. It's not like we're not. You know, we're living within a white supremacist patriarchal structure. We all know it's been around for thousands of years. And, you know, I'm not going to say we can dismantle that in our lifetimes. It's fairly unlikely. But what we can do is change our environment, you know, what we achieve in the small amount of time we have on Earth. So for me, it's just changing my own. It
is. I feel like I always say, you know, it's about you either being the change or leading the change. If you're not being the change, not leading the change, then you're obviously part of the problem, you know? So, I get it. So as we've been speaking about the whole, you know, lived experiences and what it's like working in comms, what would you want from your employer? Like, what is an ideal environment from your employer? What makes a good working environment, and what is it you want from your employer? Because I feel like employers go along and they have all these different initiatives and things that they're trying to do because they think that's the right thing to do. But really, what is it that you would want from your employer? What's an ideal kind of setup for a workplace? Because for me, I always think it's about actually bringing out the best in your people, making sure that you're identifying their qualities and bringing the best out of them, and not just thinking, okay, this is the person of colour, so let's stick her on DEI, or this is the person of colour, what do you think about this campaign because it's going towards women in Brixton? Ask them first if that's what they want to be, you know, included in, and then let it be known. Because I feel like a lot of things happen. Like I had a conversation with someone recently about, I think we touched on this as well, when we spoke about the H&M debacle that happened with the monkey t-shirt, right?
Yes.
And people always kept saying, well, you know, if there was someone of colour around the table. And my point is, well, actually, what if there was someone of colour around the table, but they weren't empowered to share their voice? You know, it can be as simple as that sometimes. You can be in a room and you're the one person and you're sticking out. You might feel like, actually, I do want to say something, but everyone might not get it. Or it might not, you know, how empowered are they to actually share that? So I feel like there's a case of there's a few layers there. I feel like there's the, speaking up, but also being a genuine part of the team and making sure that's a bit more holistic rather than an add-on, which is, well, she's a person of colour, let's pop her in that team because she checks the box,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely.
I think in terms of the person of colour, look, I would say when I was in that Home Office, for example, and I was the comms lead for the hostile environment, which, to be clear, I didn't apply for or ask for.
Right.
However, but me being in the room did mean that when we were doing our campaigns, which were essentially, telling people not to come to the UK, telling people to kind of seek asylum in the first country they'd reached, the right to rent, right to work policies, through my lens of somebody who is a person of colour, who has also come from the networking predominantly in London, and certainly lots of Black communities, meant that I was able to manage it. I mean, I was there basically after the go home bans, pre-Windrush.
Wow.
So I kind of feel like there was a period of time where the Home Office didn't look racist. I was there. So we absolutely bring a valid voice into a room of people that don't quite get the nuances.
Yeah.
But absolutely, but that's not what we should be there for. The fact that I was kind of handed that role without really asking
being
for
consulted about it.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So of course I completely advocate that, and it's one of the things I've never fully understood about our industry is that, we don't, the 91% white upper middle class, it reflects the boardrooms. It doesn't reflect society. Until the makeup of the boardroom changes, we will continue to struggle to increase the diversity and the leadership of PR.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Yeah.
In terms of what I want from an employer, I want to be valued. I want to be respected. If you're going to recruit me into your team, then listen to me and be happy that you've got someone like me. Don't be threatened by what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do. I want to feel safe. I want to feel in that environment. I want to work with talented, good people. I want to, again, like I said before, I want people that match my energy and they match my values. That's what I'm looking for. And, in a bit of clear direction, we all work in ambiguity sometimes in terms of budgets and this, that, and the other, but you want people who are consistent in their behaviours. And so, what I expect from my leaders and my bosses is what I expect from myself in terms of the teams I manage. That's why listening skills are so important. I have a lot of empathy. I'm an empathetic person, and of course I can empathize in a real way with people that have had my lived experiences. So the trauma that I've experienced, all those other things that I've experienced, I can help someone else. There are some experiences I haven't had. So, but then I listen and I learn and I try to understand the motivations of people, and I want the best out of people, because everybody can achieve so much if they're in the right environment and they're with the right people.
Absolutely.
And the whole thing around bringing your best self to work. Well, the best way is creating an environment where you feel safe.
Exactly.
You
feel like you can bring your best self to work.
For being different. It's all that self-awareness stuff. So I feel very positive about the next generation, because they're a lot more aware of some of these things that maybe we weren't aware when we were younger.
Yeah, no, I completely get that. Good points as well. Really good points as well. And then I suppose everyone keeps going on about diversity. What does diversity look like to you?
Sometimes the Spice Girls brings into my head, right? I think it's because it's the 90s. Do you remember when we were like, oh my God, there's a brown one. Excellent.
There's someone in the group.
And that's our generation, right? Growing up in the 80s and the 90s. But it's diversity. I think it's the inclusion, the equity bit that's important, isn't it? It's like
I think so.
We've all been in that situation. I mean, they tick a box because they've got, oh look, you're brown, we'll just tick a box. It's the
inclusion and equity part. That's exactly it. I think that's a bit that people do not focus on enough. And it's like, well, actually, I've diversity. Oh, we've got a brown person, we've got a black person. Okay, check, we've got that. But no, it's inclusion. It's the equity. It's the being fairly treated, and making sure you're actually giving them the progression to move forward, and support them, like you say, a safe space to share ideas and to grow and to blossom. So no, I completely get and agree with you on that. So
and the sense of belonging is really important to me as well. I think some of the best teams I've worked in, and I will go back to the Met actually, and it was a bit of a tick box exercise because generally there was like a black guy, there was a Sikh chief inspector, there was me, there was a mixed race guy who was the intern. It was a little bit like a tick box exercise.
Okay, it sounded like United Kinds of Benetton, you know. It's like a Benetton ad in that department.
But there was genuinely a sense of belonging in that team because we were all very different. We'd all have very, that's like we were saying the skin folk thing, like we've all got different experiences.
Yeah.
I haven't had the exact same experience, like the doctor and lawyer thing, which is a key grain of truth in the stereotype for lots of Black and Asian families. That wasn't my stereotype.
That wasn't my stereotype either.
That definitely wasn't, I love the idea of my parents ever thinking I might be a doctor or a lawyer. So I think that's the thing. I don't think it helps when we create more stereotypes upon a stereotype. Real diversity is for people to feel like their voices are heard and they're valid and they're part of the team.
Absolutely.
And I think that's one thing that I've always said this is I often feel like that playground mentality, we've all seen it, we've seen the dynamics between boys and girls at school. Some people just don't grow up, and some of that behavior, that emotionally immature behavior sometimes exists in workplaces.
Oh, absolutely.
And I feel if we all just matured a little bit, then maybe we could get to that golden cloud in the sky where we all hug each other. I don't know, we all work together better, but we've got a long way to go to get to that.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that too. So in terms of like your proud moments, obviously it's also about giving your flowers. So tell us about some of your proudest moments. It can be work related or personal, and what kind of career highlights. You can share some of those as well. That'd be great.
Proud highlights. Just surviving, right?
Oh, that's cool. We've got to be proud to survive. Absolutely. The fact that we're still here in the industry is a proud moment. Okay.
I think probably, some of my, there's a couple really, but I think I was genuinely proud when I was at the Met, right? And I know people probably don't believe me when I say this, but when I worked in Brent, because I was working within the community and I worked really closely with the council, PCT, London Probation, lots of different community groups. I was proud in terms of what we achieved around public confidence. So when I first got to Brent, it was like 20% and it got up to 80%. And the only reason brilliant. I think that made a difference is because we all had a concerted effort. Everybody within the team, put their effort in terms of improving the service we were giving to the communities, and that's what made it really important.
Right.
And so I still feel like some of the work that I did with the Met in terms of working with young people and helping them pick a different path, I still feel like that was really, really important. So I still, and that's just, and that to me is the meaningful thing, is that you can get a great piece of coverage, you could be on the front page of the FT, you can get on the Today programme, that's fab, but it's the legacy, what you leave behind. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's good. That's some good examples that you use there. That's a good one. So would you say that's been one of your main highlights, knowing that you left that? Because 20 to 80% is massive. Yeah, exactly. It's huge. It's brilliant. And I would say also, I think probably the work that I did at SciFast, I think was I was really given a great opportunity in terms of being given all the comms bits. Yeah. And so that meant that, we might I think we tripled the membership in 3 years. So I love anything where I feel like I've contributed.
Yeah, absolutely.
to like those clear outcomes that I was part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Pat on the back. You've got to do it. You've got to do it. You've got to do it. Well done to you. I think that's cool. And then, so I suppose another one I wanted to ask you is more about, your thoughts on how the industry will evolve over the next few years. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously, things are changing, things are going a bit more digital, but there's the focus on DEI is still there. The focus on maybe the pay gap is still a major issue. I feel like it's going to be interesting because people are getting older and our industry is not necessarily being as nice women who age in the industry. So, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I think... I still think the future is bright if we're able to kind of keep ahead of all the trends. I think that like the digital stuff is the issue. I think, we all know any PRs that have been trying to sell stories in over the last few months, it's a harding to nothing. So social media, that whole digital side is where it's going. It's engaging people directly. So I think as an industry, we need to be prepared for that and to be making sure that we are educating ourselves so we don't become irrelevant, because and budgets become smaller. We don't want to, we're having to compete with marketing, all that kind of stuff. So I think making sure that we're all over everything. Hopefully the pressure around D&I isn't going to go away. It will continue.
I hope not.
Kind of, and I
feel
think
like it's dwindling a little bit, to be honest.
I think, right, is that there is some fantastic, what you're doing at the moment, you're showcasing, women in the industry. You've got all the work that Elizabeth Bannon-Luke has been doing and Taylor Bennett, they're like, look, here's the future talent. There are young people here in the industry that are of colour here. Yeah. And then a lot of what Elizabeth has also done is identifying all the, I know it's the age thing, the older comms people. We've always been here, right? We've been here for ages. So it's not, the industry can't pretend they don't know now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They know all the people that literally they've been shown them. If we're not getting, promoted into those senior positions, then
it's reflective of the industry. It's just reflective of the industry. There's only so much that we can do. We can't force your hand. Essentially, we can display who's here, who's got the great talent. And like you said, Elizabeth's been doing some great work. She's got her whole kite mark thing situation that she does. Like you said, there's Taylor Bennett, which I really love what they do as well with getting those young and into the industry. That's key because I feel like the entry points are key for our industry. But again, it's also about the industry being committed. And I feel like there are some who really are committed and will do whatever they can. And you've got those who are doing it because they have to, and the pressure is on them. And I think that's where the cracks begin to show, because then you get the more checkbox.
Exactly, and that comes down to it's actions speak louder than words. So we can all say the right thing, but are we doing the right thing? And that
PR is a talking industry, isn't it? We talk a lot in this industry.
Exactly, we talk a lot, but it's about doing, and that's why that boardroom piece is really is important. And the culture thing that we have to put more effort into the culture. If
work culture, your workplace,
the work culture, an agency and in-house.
Absolutely.
So I think there's always going to be a play. I mean, I think I'll go back to ESG and purpose. I think as an industry. And I've said this many times, lots of people say this, that, I see PR as a strategic management function. We enable businesses to operate effectively. So I think, I want to see us all working collectively together to drive the industry forward. So the boardroom see how important it is for us. They see that it's really important to maybe have a chief comms officer on the board. You're so to be in that influencing position, that's where we need to be.
I feel like in some cases we are at the board, and in some cases we're not. I've seen it, depending on who you speak to. But absolutely, I agree. I agree with that.
It depends on the person, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm going to try and be positive about the fact that as long as we all know how to we understand social media, and we'll be all right.
We'll be all right. Yeah, fair enough. So is there anything in terms of like a key lessons that you've learned throughout your career that you'd want to share with those who are trying to come into the industry?
I think creating a network is really important. I know people say this a lot. Whilst you've got the energy, go to the events, soak up as much as you can. But the key thing is just try not to say no to things. If you get an opportunity, just do it. We only really regret the things that we don't do. So I think that's really important. And also the other thing which I did, and this is me being really open, is that I think and this is probably a different time, but certainly for me in PR, you weren't really allowed to be yourself. I said this before, but myself and Claire Foster worked at a PR agency together, and it really felt like a finishing school. The way we were kind of like, only take 3 sandwiches when you're having lunch, and very, very specific in terms of our behaviour.
Okay.
And I felt there was, I mean, I've got a strong personality, right? So anyone that's worked with me knows what I'm like at work, but I definitely feel like I kind of dissociated a little bit from who I am, because I think when you're in an industry that can be fairly superficial, you feel like you have to be like everyone else. And I just think, I think it's really important to be yourself, right? Because that's, that's you. You can't, we tell organizations to be authentic. Then we need to be authentic.
Then we don't do it ourselves. No, I get it. I think that's really important, because I was thinking that as well, because we know the advice, what kind of advice would you give some young people of color considering entering the industry? I think that's some good key points there about being yourself, but also soaking up what's around you, asking questions, and if you don't feel comfortable in a certain situation, I feel like you have to stay there, you can look at other options, because I feel like particularly when you're new in the industry, you don't know which way to turn maybe, or it can really shape the way, whether you come out of the industry early or not as well, depending on where you go and whether you feel like you've been welcomed or not.
One thing this is the thing I've been thinking about recently. It's like it's changing your mindset to like an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset. And reading a book about that specific thing. So it's this idea where we think, there's not enough jobs, and I'm like, it's like, actually, if you just check, there are loads of jobs. There are loads of jobs out there.
Exactly.
You just have to look for them. And
right.
networking is really key, making sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. There's all these things that you need to do, but I just have to have faith. It's a brilliant industry to be in because of the range of things that you can do. Every organization needs PR.
They all need communicators. They all absolutely do.
Yeah.
They absolutely do. I agree. And then, as you mentioned mindset, I was actually going there. It's like you're reading my mind here, Sarah. Okay? we are. We seem to be really there at the moment, right? Yeah. So, again, as you mentioned mindset, now internal mindset war and self-limiting beliefs. We touched on it a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important that we do touch on this again, because particularly as like you've been in the industry over 20 years. I've been in the industry, for a very long time as well. And as you push forward, you do still come against your own mindset war, your internal mindset war. Like you said, the imposter syndrome, am I good enough? And, managing your kind of self-limiting beliefs and things like that. So how do you manage that at the moment? And, what advice would you give to others? Everything's, a learning progress. So I would say that all the time. Yeah.
I think everyone's on their own journey.
Yes.
Right. But for me, I have always, and I've been open about it, talked about it before, sort of through Women in PR, that I've had, this imposter syndrome, not feeling good enough. For me, I had to work out where that was coming from. Yeah. And not everyone has to do that. You can just read a book and talk about, changing your mindset. I had to really understand where it was coming from. So for me, recognizing, and I have gained a lot of great things from my mum, by the way, my work ethic, my charm. There's lots of fantastic things that I got from my mum, but I also have got a little bit of low self-worth from my mum, because she has it, and her mum probably had it, and it's been passed down, through generations. And now I recognize where that's coming from. I realize it's just not true. It's completely irrational. And so I think it's, doing that little, not everyone has to do it. I had to do that for myself. And so I journal, I read a lot. I surround myself with positive, happy people with good sense of humours.
Yes,
I think to live a life that sometimes has been difficult, I have got a dark sense of humour. That's what keeps me going. So journaling and just remembering that those negative voices, they're irrational, and is to look at your actual reality. Where is that true? Is that, and it's not true. It's just wherever that, it could be a teacher, it could be anyone in your life that's kind of been a bit negative, and that voice is in your head. So I think, and make time for yourself, because that's where you kind of discover these things.
Absolutely. Quiet time. I think it's difficult because there's so much information coming at us. It's information overload. Whether you're on social media or whatever, your senses are always on alert. So I feel like you're right. Just having a bit of quiet time is super important as well, and focusing some of that me time and trying to schedule it in. Easier said than done sometimes, but worth the try, definitely. Yes. And so, looking back on your journey, would you do it all over again?
I think everyone would do it all over again. I think that we're all a product of our social conditioning, right? And our genetics. And even though there are some things I probably wouldn't do, but I've learned so much on this journey. I've learned from making mistakes is a huge thing, right? If you don't fail, you never.
It's really important. Yeah, it's just lessons.
So,
it's just learning lessons. That's all it is. It's not failure. It's learning lessons. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I'd do it all again, and like I would do it all again. And I think that I've gained some incredible friends, some incredible experiences. It's a fantastic, and I've been really lucky in terms of what I've been able to do in my career. I know we haven't gone into lots of details. People can read my LinkedIn profile, but I've had a great time, and I think that's what we need to remember. You know, PR is not ER, as one of my friends always says. It's, you know, we do it because it can be fun.
It can be fun.
So I probably would do all the same. I'd make all the same mistakes again.
Oh, that's good though. That is good, because not everyone says they always do it again. Some people feel like they will, some people feel like they won't. So I think that's good. And then a more quirky one, which is, what's the best and the worst advice you've been given in the industry?
Oh gosh,
some funny ones.
I think the best advice is when a boss said to me, you can't be friends with everyone. The more senior you become.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good piece of advice, because I'm a very friendly person.
Yeah.
And I think it's when you become more senior, I think it's important to have a little bit of distance. And I think it's important for your staff as well.
Yeah.
What's the worst advice? I've never had the worst advice. I've definitely had some really rude comments over the years. All right,
go throw out a rude or dodgy comment.
Yeah, so I think when I first started out in PR, I had had a bad experience at work. I was sexually harassed by my first manager, which I think a lot of women at some point in the PR industry has definitely been in a situation where some men think it's like a dating pool. And it really had a big impact on me, because it had a big impact on my worth, actually. Like, was I there
because you look good or because of your skills, essentially?
So when I was going for interviews, there was a guy interviewed me, and he said to me, and at the time I used to bite my nails, I don't bite them anymore, but he said to me, you look great, but you bite your nails. And I just thought, wow.
Like, how dare you?
This is a big agency that I'm not going to mention.
Yeah, fair enough. But how dare you? Yeah,
I thought, okay, you know. So I think, I don't know if anyone's given me any. I'm just trying to think. I can't think of any really bad advice.
Okay, well, that's good.
It's going to come to me after the call.
It will come back to you later and be like, oh, this is what it was. But no, it's fine. No, it's good. It's good. No, well, we appreciate you coming and sharing with us anyway. And I suppose my last question would be, do you have any rules that you've implemented to help you along your career journey? Do you have any like hard and fast rules? Like for me, I always felt like if I wasn't getting promoted within, then I'd look out and move out and get promoted outwards. And that I wouldn't necessarily stop myself because of the environment. I would remove myself from that environment. That was one of the rules that I always lived by. And another rule that I always lived by is also when I go on interviews, I love interviews, okay? I'm one of those where people love interviews because I'm also interviewing my employer. Just like you want to see if I'm good for you, I want to see if you're good enough for me. And I've always had that way when I've gone into sort of interviews and for my career journey. So I've been to places where I've been interviewed and they might want to have me back, but I felt like it wasn't going to be a good fit for me. And then I wouldn't take it. So those are certain things that I had in so that I feel like I've got control over what I'm doing as well. Maybe I'm a little bit of a control freak, maybe. But you know.
Rules. Yeah, I think it's important to do due diligence. Yeah, definitely. And often that comes with experience, right? You take a job, you're kind of maybe ignoring some of the red flags. I've certainly done that in my career, and paid for it really when you go into the job and you realise it's not what necessarily what they put in the job description. Yeah, you know, you don't have the autonomy that they promised you, all those kind of things. So I think definitely due diligence is really important, and researching the company, you know, looking at Glassdoor, all of those things
absolutely important, because that was not around back in the day, people.
It wasn't.
So use that.
Yes,
I think that is so key. That would have helped me out with those different places, I believe. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Yeah, you use the information that's out there, and so you can make a really considered choice. But I think probably rules is I guess if I'm not learning, like if I feel like I'm not progressing either through promotion or through what I'm gaining from a role, then I'll move on. I think we're not,
that's important. That's really important.
I think
that's you taking yourself outside of your comfort zone too, because your comfort zone, you can sit there and be like, I'm getting paid, I'm fine. But actually, they say life begins outside the comfort zone. You need to keep challenging yourself, don't you?
Yeah. So I think always challenging myself. Joining the Women in PR committee, that was a challenge in itself for both of us, right? To be in an environment that had been a fairly exclusive environment. So I think, challenge yourself. I think that's a rule to live by, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. We're coming to the end of our interview. So thank you for coming on and for sharing your experiences. It's been really, really interesting to have you on, and I hope you've enjoyed the chat we've had as well. Now, guys, I will be back with another series, so stay tuned. I am doing a whole schedule of interviews, so I'm bringing to you some wonderful people from the world of communicators. So we will be back soon, so stay tuned, and thanks for watching 9 to 5 Web Rebels and the special series of Gems in Comms.